It was a cold, grey morning in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, when the small town woke to the sound of gunshots echoing through the quiet streets. The air was thick with fear as police cordoned off the area. A gang war had erupted overnight, leaving 2 men dead and several others critically injured. Blood stained the pavement, and whispers of revenge filled the air. This wasn't just another random act of violence, it was a brutal reminder of how deeply entrenched gangs had become in New Zealand's underworld. If you enjoy content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Gangs are loud, defiant, and fueled by chaos. They thrive on crime, violence, and intimidation, existing solely to make money and wreak havoc. They operate outside the rules, caring nothing for their victims. Age, gender, or background mean nothing. Profit is the only goal, and destruction is just part of the business.
New Zealand's gang culture dates back to the 1950s, but it wasn't until the 1960s that the first notable gangs, the Mongrel Mob and Black Power, came to prominence. These gangs initially grew among Māori and Pacific Island migrants who faced socio-economic disparity, systemic racism and abuse in state care.
In the 1990s, Timaru was drowning in fear. Police were overwhelmed as gang-related shootings, assaults and firebombings became almost routine. The Road Knights and Devil's Henchmen held the town in a grip of terror. In just 3 months at the end of 1991, gang violence left a bloody trail. Beatings, home invasions and 2 homicides, all tied back to the gangs. The crime wave was relentless, proving that even a small town could spiral into lawlessness. When Bill Gregory arrived, he found a community paralyzed by fear and a police force struggling to regain control. Gang violence had spiraled out of control. Shootings, beatings, and firebombings became an almost daily reality in Timaru. The Road Knights and Devil's Henchmen ruled the streets, leaving the town paralyzed with fear. By the end of 1991, the violence had reached a breaking point. Multiple attacks, home invasions, and 2 murders all linked back to the gangs. Despite police efforts, their temporary crackdowns only offered brief relief. As soon as the pressure eased, the chaos returned. Then, one night, a stolen car rolled up outside a rival gang's headquarters. The back window lowered, and what followed was like a scene from a movie, a brutal escalation of an already vicious feud. Detective Bill Gregory had seen gang violence in other cities, but nothing compared to what he encountered in Timaru. The recent murder of a gang member and a series of arson attacks finally pushed the community to its limit. Residents had endured years of bloodshed, but now they wanted action. Gregory was given one job: end the war for good. This wasn't going to be another short-term fix. Instead, a long-term strategy was put in place, one designed to dismantle the gangs from the inside out. The first step? Confronting them directly. Gregory met with both gangs, making it clear that police pressure would be relentless. Then the crackdown began. Police raided gang houses, checking every detail: building codes, health regulations, property ownership. They targeted illegal liquor sales, which had been fueling gang finances. Everything connected to their makeshift bars was seized: furniture, chillers, lights, even the bars themselves. Once stripped of their profits, gang influence began to crumble. But the key to real change was community involvement. A confidential hotline was set up, and at first only a trickle of tips came in. As police took action and publicized their success, trust grew. Soon the flow of information became a flood, giving law enforcement exactly what they needed to dismantle the gangs piece by piece. As police pressure grew stronger, the gang's grip on the town weakened. For the first time in years, Timaru's residents could breathe easier, and the reign of fear that had held them hostage was finally broken. The gangs never regained their former power. Even 2 decades later, they remained a shadow of what they once were, a testament to Bill Gregory's relentless crackdown. His strategy had worked in Timaru, but could it take down a rogue gang terrorizing the lower North Island? The Nomads were an offshoot of Black Power, their insignia marked by the number 77, signifying their 1977 split from the gang. Led by the feared Dennis Hines, they controlled Timaru and Foxton through sheer brutality. Their reputation for violence was legendary, and when they descended on the Mountain Rock Festival, they weren't there for the music. Early Sunday morning, they crossed paths with a rival gang member. He never stood a chance. Dragged over a wire fence, he was beaten and humiliated. "You still think you're tough," they taunted before Dennis Hines stepped in, butcher's knife in hand. With a swift motion, he slashed the man's face and throat. Yet despite the brutality of the attack, fear kept the victim and witnesses silent. No one dared challenge the Nomads, not even the man who had nearly been killed. For years, the gang operated unchecked, running a criminal empire built on fear. Assaults, intimidation, and taxing victims, essentially violent robberies, became routine. In Foxton, people lived in terror, too scared to speak out. But police knew the gang's power came from isolation. If they could unite the victims, they could break the Nomads' hold on the town. 2 officers began investigating the vehicles the gang was using. Many weren't registered to Nomad members, but to terrified locals. When confronted, victims revealed the truth. They had been beaten and forced to hand over their cars. The police gathered these victims together, convincing them that their strength lay in numbers. A coordinated crackdown was planned, multiple arrests in a single day to send a clear message. The Nomads were not untouchable. As gang members were hauled into court, the fear that had silenced the community began to crack. Then, a breakthrough. An unexpected witness came forward. A festival goer with no gang ties had been inside a portable toilet when he lucked out and saw the brutal attack unfold. He had seen Dennis Hines slash the victim's throat. With witness testimony and a united community, the police finally had the leverage they needed. The Nomads' reign of terror was coming to an end. During the trial, an unexpected break came in the form of a phone call from Hawke's Bay. A man claimed to have a photograph police might be interested in. It was a seemingly ordinary picture of the festival stage, but in the foreground, it captured something crucial. Several Nomads wearing their patches, standing just meters away from their target. The image froze time, showing the victim and his associate walking straight into the ambush. It was the final piece of evidence, confirming what had already been testified in court. The case culminated in a massive trial, with multiple gang members facing a long list of charges, from aggravated assault to robbery. The result? A staggering 43 convictions out of 46 charges, dealing a crushing blow to the Nomads. Many were sent to prison, and the gang never regained its former strength. But gang power wasn't just about numbers. In the South Island, another group operated with a different kind of menace. Known as the Fourth Reich, they weren't just criminals, they were extremists. One night, Christchurch detectives responded to a violent brawl, finding a man bleeding out in a driveway. His injuries were horrific: deep cuts to his scalp, a stab wound to the ribs, a gaping chest wound, and even a severed finger. "Hey, can you hear me? Just stay still, help's on the way." Blood poured down his face, his head split open like a cracked egg. The brutality suggested something far more sinister than a street fight. Detective Derek Shaw had investigated gangs before, but this was different. The Fourth Reich had emerged from Paramaribo prison in the late 90s, a group bound not just by crime, but by violent neo-Nazi ideology. Their hatred was indiscriminate, their crimes extreme. Even among hardened detectives, they were considered some of the most ruthless criminals in the country. And this attack was just the beginning. Nathan was barely clinging to consciousness when detectives found him, his body battered, his clothes soaked in blood. The scene inside the house told the story of a brutal assault. Blood smeared on the couch, shoe prints tracked through the kitchen, even splattered across a television screen. But despite his injuries, Nathan refused to talk. He knew the price of snitching. Detective Derek Shaw had seen this before. Victims too terrified to speak, but he wasn't giving up. Visiting Nathan in the hospital, he worked to gain his trust. When Nathan was discharged, Shaw even gave him his own worn-out running shoes in exchange for Nathan's blood-stained pair, hoping to collect forensic evidence. Eventually, Nathan agreed to share his story, but he wouldn't sign a statement. "If I sign this," he said grimly, "I'm signing my death warrant." Nathan had been sent from Nelson to deliver cannabis oil to prisoners in Christchurch, but there was one problem: he was an addict. By the time he arrived, some of the drugs were missing. The Fourth Reich gang didn't tolerate mistakes. One evening, Nathan and his girlfriend were walking when a car pulled up beside them. Inside were Ivan Gidschlag and Greg Dunnell, both ruthless enforcers for the gang. They ordered him into the car and drove him to a house in the city. The moment he stepped inside, he was blindsided, punched, kicked, and stomped on. They tried to break his jaw, but when that failed, they resorted to knives. One blade was driven into the side of his head, then dragged across his scalp, splitting the skin down to the bone. But they weren't finished. Dragging him toward the television, they demanded he choose a finger. When he hesitated, they grabbed his hand and sawed through a finger with a serrated bread knife, working it back and forth until it finally snapped off. Somehow, Nathan escaped. He stumbled to a neighboring house, leaving a trail of blood, and collapsed in the driveway. That's where the police found him. Forensic evidence sealed the case. Gitchlag's shoe print was imprinted on the top of Nathan's own bloodied shoes, a near-perfect match. Both suspects were arrested, Gitchlag in Nelson, Dunnell in Christchurch. Neither said a word. They followed the gang code of silence, but the evidence spoke for them. In court, Nathan defied his fears, taking the stand and giving unflinchingly honest testimony. The forensic work backed him up, leaving the jury with no doubt. The two gang enforcers were convicted and sentenced to 8 years for wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. The Fourth Reich's reputation for brutality was well earned. Of the 15 known full members, 6 would eventually serve life sentences for murder. 1 committed 2 separate killings. For detectives, infiltrating these criminal worlds came with risk. But to dismantle the power of gangs, there was only one option: stepping straight into their territory and fighting them from within. Undercover work was dangerous, but Constable Catherine McKay had the right look to blend in. With spiky hair and a studded belt, she was sent to buy drugs from street dealers, slipping into their world unnoticed. One sting stood out, busting a dealer selling to school kids. Disguised as a teenager, she made 3 visits before he finally led her to a back room, past a series of doors. Then came the click of a steel lock behind her. "You're a cop," he accused, eyes narrowing. McKay kept her cool. "Nah, not me," she lied, forcing a laugh, masking her growing panic. Without another word, the dealer stepped out, leaving her trapped. No windows, no exits, just a waiting game. 10 agonizing minutes later, he returned, tossing a bag of drugs at her. "Here," he said. She grabbed it, played it cool, and walked out, heartbeat hammering in her ears. Only when she rounded the corner did she exhale, knowing she'd escaped with her cover intact. But gang operations evolved. Dealers no longer invited buyers inside. Instead, Christchurch's Mongrel Mob ran a dealing alley with a designated route leading to a small window. Prices were openly displayed. Mongrel Mob-style advertising. Customers handed over cash, took their product, and disappeared. Detective Ross Tarawiti and his team bugged their phones, listening in on gang-coded conversations. The mob barked like dogs as a sign of respect and used construction slang, ordering nails when they really meant meth, but detectives weren't fooled. They moved in, executing 38 warrants in one sweep. Over 40 patched members were arrested. Every single one was convicted. After the Christchurch chapter of the Mongrel Mob was wiped out, crime in the city took a noticeable dip, but across the country, other gangs filled the void. In Otara, Black Power was running one of Auckland's biggest tinny houses, raking in millions. Their headquarters, known as the Marae, pulled in up to $177,000 in a single day. Enough to fund luxury lifestyles while clogging the streets with drug-seeking customers. Operation Soprano targeted the gang's leadership. The Falker family ran the operation like a business. Abe Falker Sr. as president, his brother as treasurer, and his son managing day-to-day sales. But their home movies revealed more than just drug dealing. Detectives uncovered brutal assaults, firearm offenses, and witness intimidation. Footage of Abe Jr. abusing his partner sealed his fate in court. Guilty. The entire Falker family was sent to prison, with Abe Sr. sentenced to 8 years. The gang pad was bulldozed. But the rules of the game kept changing. By the late 90s, police saw a disturbing shift. Rival gangs were working together. Street-level thugs, once driven by tribal loyalty, were now focused on profit. Ethnic street gangs partnered with outlaw motorcycle clubs, pooling resources. Some had meth cucks, others had supply lines, and distribution networks expanded. The Mongrel Mob had soldiers on the street, knowing every addict had a potential buyer. The white motorcycle gangs, like the Hells Angels, had international smuggling routes. Working together, they formed a nationwide meth empire. Police surveillance exposed meetings between the Hells Angels and other gangs like the Road Knights. The Angels positioned themselves as drug suppliers, offering wealth to those willing to distribute on their behalf. But there was a condition: gang members had to reduce their street crime and keep a low profile. It worked. Some took off their patches, appearing reformed, but insiders knew the truth. They weren't leaving gang life, just becoming more sophisticated criminals. "We're a motorcycle club, not a gang," one Hells Angel insisted. "We're a brotherhood." But detectives weren't fooled. For years, police had fought gangs head-on, only to see new leaders rise. Now they needed a way to make change come from within. Meanwhile, on the streets, old rivalries still boiled over. One Saturday night, a carload of Mongrel mobsters hurled abuse at Black Power members. They were chased off, but the feud didn't end there. Hours later, they returned, this time armed. Wanganui CIB boss Dave Kirby got the call. The gangs were at it again. Got it. Here's a rewritten version with the same events, but a more dramatic, mafia-style ending. The street was quiet, but the air was thick with tension. A child had been killed, and that meant one thing: blood had to be repaid with blood. At first, no one wanted to talk. The gangs had their own code, their own way of dealing with justice. But this wasn't just another hit, another score to settle. A 2-year-old had been shot, and even the hardest men in the Black Power gang couldn't stomach that. Witnesses came forward, slowly at first, whispering what they knew. Then 2 of the Mongrel Mob, the ones who had actually been in the car, broke rank. Fear had gotten to them, and they knew that testifying was their only way out. Protection was offered, but in the world of gangs, protection was just a promise on paper. When the trial came, the courtroom was packed with gangsters, their faces hard, their eyes burning with silent threats. But the evidence was clear. The shooter, Hayden Wallace, the mastermind, KCH, the driver, Ranji Forbes, all 3 were found guilty. The verdict was read, and the tension broke. The Black Power men, the ones who once vowed vengeance, nodded. Justice had been served. Not their way, but served nonetheless. But everyone knew that nothing truly ends in the world of gangs. A name never disappears. A face is never forgotten. A bullet fired in one war is always waiting to be returned in another. The fall of Little Willie. Raurua Detective Sergeant Chris McLeod had dealt with gangs for years, but even he wasn't prepared for what happened next. The Filthy Few were a different breed, not just a gang, but a business. Drugs, guns, violence, they moved like shadows, controlled like kings, and at the center of it all was James Wilson, known as Little Willie. Little Willie had always carried himself like a legend, a tattooist, a drug dealer, a man who styled himself after Charles Manson with a cross inked into his forehead. Even his own gang found him unnerving, adding a swastika and the words "Forever Filthy" above his brow, as if to make his image even darker. But his downfall wouldn't come from a rival or a cop, it would come from within. Joanne Vanen Bowden was no stranger to the life. She had fallen in love with the gang, gotten close to Willie, but when she moved on to Shades, the gang's sergeant-at-arms, Willie took it as an insult, and in the world of men like him, insults could only be answered one way. When Joanne was found murdered, her body dumped under a mattress at the bottom of a ravine, the message was clear: she had been erased. But the Filthy Few had gotten sloppy. Evidence was everywhere: trails of fabric, broken pieces of pink plaster cast, DNA. The pink cast was a signature. Only 3 people in town had one, 2 of them little girls. The third, Little Willie himself. The arrest came swift, but the conviction, that would take something more. That would take Shades turning against his own. It was unthinkable. Gang loyalty was everything, but Shades had seen something in Willie that even he couldn't stomach. Maybe it was the way he killed Joanne. Maybe it was the growing sickness inside him. Whatever it was, he flipped. The trial was a war. Shades, looking like everything the jury expected, a filthy, unkempt gang enforcer, sat in the witness box, facing a wall of defense lawyers trying to tear him apart. And then came the moment that broke it all open. The defense accused him of being the killer, and Shades, without missing a beat, laughed. "I'm not the one trying to be Charles." "Manson," he sneered, throwing up his arms and mimicking the crossbones tattooed on Willie's forehead. "He's the one trying to be Charles King Manson. He's evil." The jury soaked it in. The trial was over. Willie was done. But in the world of crime, nobody walks away clean. No one walks away. For a moment, there was silence, and then the streets began to move again. Whispers traveled fast. A man had broken the code. A sergeant-at-arms had stood in court and pointed the finger. And that meant one thing. A reckoning was coming. Shades knew it. Even as he tried to disappear, he ran, hid out in back alleys, out-of-the-way motels. He kept moving, but the past was always one step behind. One night, a car pulled up outside his latest hideout. The streetlight flickered. The engine idled just a little too long. Inside, Shades froze. He knew what this was. He had seen it before, been on the other side of it. A man in a leather jacket stepped out of the car, his face hidden in the dark. No words were spoken, no warnings were given. The shot was clean, a single bullet straight to the head. The car pulled away, disappearing into the night. By the time police arrived, the scene was already cold. No witnesses, no leads, no answers. Just a man who had dared to break the rules, and the inevitable end that had been waiting for him all along. In the world of gangs, justice isn't served in courtrooms. It's written in blood. If you haven't already done so, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications for the next video.